What you are about to hear is a story, not a true story in the documentary sense. The numbers are beyond what any individual inherits, and the circumstances are beyond what ordinary life produces. But it is a story that contains truths about pride and assumption, and the specific cost of judging a person's worth by the surface presentation they arrive in. It is the kind of story that has been told in different forms across every culture and every era, because it addresses something that is permanently true about human nature, which is that the people who dismiss others based on incomplete information are almost always the people who will most regret the dismissal. Consider this a parable told at speed, with the entertainment value that the story's scale produces and the lesson that its resolution delivers. Some stories are bigger than real life because the truth they're carrying needs the room. The ceremony was held at the Harrington estate outside the city, a venue that had hosted the weddings of 3 generations of the Harrington family, and that had been chosen by Marcus Harrington's mother with the specific attention to prestige that she applied to every decision involving the family's public presentation. Marcus was 31 years old, the only son of a family whose wealth had been established 2 generations earlier in manufacturing, and that had maintained itself through the specific combination of careful investment and strategic marriage that old money families understand as both practical and cultural necessity. The bride, a woman named Elena Vasquez, had been introduced to Marcus through a mutual acquaintance 8 months earlier. She was 28, quietly spoken, and had arrived in Marcus's life from a background that his mother had described, in a conversation that Elena had not been meant to hear as acceptable given the circumstances. She had heard it, she had said nothing. The ceremony proceeded through its stages with the specific formality that the Harrington family brought to public events, everything correct, everything positioned, everything performing the version of the family that the family had decided the world should see. And then, in the specific moment after the officiant had asked if anyone present had reason to object, and no one had objected, Marcus Harrington leaned toward Elena Vasquez and said something in a voice low enough that only she could hear it. What he said was this. He said that he had agreed to the marriage because his mother had wanted it, and because Elena was presentable enough and quiet enough to serve the function the marriage was intended to serve, but that she should understand from the beginning that this was an arrangement and not a romance, and that she should not expect from him anything beyond the public performance of a husband. He said it with the confidence of a man who has never had a reason to consider that the person he is speaking to might have options. Elena looked at him. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said in the same low voice, "I understand completely. I would like you to understand something in return." She reached into the small bag she carried and removed an envelope and placed it on the table between them. She said, "You may want to read that before we continue." Marcus looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He picked up the envelope and he opened it. The document inside was 4 pages. He read the first page. He read the second page. By the third page, the color of his face had changed in the specific way that faces change when a person is processing information that is reorganizing every assumption he has made. He did not read the 4th page at the ceremony. He would read it later alone in the room where he had retreated after saying, in a voice loud enough that several nearby guests heard it, that he needed a moment. The envelope contained a legal summary prepared by the attorneys of the Vasquez de Lacroix estate, the full name of which Elena had never used publicly in the 8 months of her relationship with Marcus Harrington, because she had decided, from the first week of their acquaintance, that she wanted to know exactly how a man treated a woman he believed had nothing before she gave him the information that would tell him she had everything. The summary documented the following. Elena Vasquez was the sole heir to the Vasquez de Lacroix estate, an industrial and technology conglomerate with holdings across 4 continents, a portfolio that had been independently valued 3 months earlier for estate planning purposes, and which the valuation had placed at $1.2 trillion. Her grandfather, a man named Aurelio Vasquez de Lacroix, had built the foundation of it over 60 years and had added to it with every subsequent generation, each one required by the estate's governance documents to increase the value before passing it on. Elena was the 4th generation. She had been educated in business and law. She had spent 6 years working in the estate's operations under names and positions that did not connect publicly to the Vasquez de Lacroix name because her grandfather had believed that the people who would run the estate after him needed to understand how the world treated people who had nothing before they could be trusted with what the estate had. She had understood, she had learned. She had arrived at Marcus Harrington's wedding with the knowledge and the composure and the envelope and the specific patience of a woman who had been waiting 8 months to see what kind of man she was dealing with. Marcus Harrington returned to the ceremony after 7 minutes in the private room. He sat down. He looked at Elena. He said very quietly that he had misspoken and that he hoped she would give him the opportunity to clarify. Elena said, Marcus, I would like you to say clearly what you meant when you said what you said. He said that he had been nervous and that the words had not come out as he had intended. Elena said, I have been listening carefully for 8 months. Words come out as they are intended. He was quiet. She said, I am going to give you one more opportunity to speak honestly, not to correct what you said, to speak honestly about who you are and what you expect from a marriage with me. Marcus looked at his mother across the room. His mother was watching with the specific expression of a woman who has realized that a situation she believed she controlled has variables she did not account for. Marcus looked back at Elena. He said, Elena, I owe you an honest conversation, not here, but I owe it to you. Elena said, yes, you do. She looked at the officiant. She said, I think we will need to pause. The officiant paused. The room, which had been holding a collective breath since Marcus's return, released it in the specific way that rooms release held breath when something significant has been acknowledged. The wedding was paused. The guests were politely directed toward the reception space. Marcus and Elena sat at the table, alone, and had the honest conversation that should have preceded the ceremony by 8 months. I want to describe the honest conversation not in its specific words, but in its quality, because the quality is what produced what came after it. Marcus talked for a long time. He talked about his family and the specific pressure of being the Harrington heir, and what that pressure had produced in him, over 31 years of being told that the purpose of a marriage was the maintenance and enhancement of the family's position. He talked about what he had become in service of that pressure, and whether the person he had become was the person he wanted to be. He talked about Elena in the way that a man who has been using a surface description of a person talks when he is required to actually see the person rather than the description. He said things that surprised him as he said them, because some truths are only accessible when the pretense that has been covering them has been removed by the specific shock of an envelope on a table. Elena listened. She asked 2 questions, both of them precise and both of them going directly to the center of what he was saying and requiring him to be more specific than he had been. She had been trained in law, and she knew how to identify the place in an argument where the speaker has said something true and stopped before reaching the full truth of it. When he finished, she said, Marcus, I have one more thing to tell you. He said, what is that? She said, I would have been willing to marry you without the estate. I came here as Elena Vasquez because I wanted to know who you were without the information. I have the information now, he said, and, she said, and I have not yet decided what to do with it. Elena did not make her decision at the table at the Harrington estate. She made it over the following 3 weeks in the specific way that consequential decisions are made when the person making them has the resources and the training and the patience to make them correctly rather than quickly. She met with her estate's attorneys. She met with her grandfather, who was 91 and still sharp in the way that people who have built empires are sharp at 91, and who listened to the full account of the 8 months and the ceremony and the envelope and the honest conversation, and who said at the end of it, and what did you learn? She said she had learned that the man she had been observing for 8 months was not the man who had said the words at the ceremony. That the man who had said the words was the product of a family and a pressure and a set of expectations that had produced a performance rather than a person, and that the honest conversation had shown her something underneath the performance that was more interesting than the performance and possibly worth something. Her grandfather was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that is a careful assessment. She said, you trained me to make careful assessments. He said, yes, what are you going to do with it? She said, I am going to give him the honest conversation he owed me 8 months ago. I am going to give him the opportunity to earn what he assumed, and I am going to watch what he does with the opportunity. Her grandfather said, and if he fails, she said, then I will have lost nothing except time. He said, and if he does not fail, she said, then I will have gained something I was not expecting. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, you are ready, she said. I have been ready. I was waiting to see if he could be. The year that followed the paused wedding was the year of the opportunity Elena had described to her grandfather. Marcus Harrington, who had spent 31 years performing the Harrington heir, and who had been given by an envelope on a table the specific shock necessary to question whether the performance was who he was, spent that year in the most honest engagement of his adult life. Not with Elena's money, which she had made clear was hers and would remain hers regardless of any personal relationship. With Elena herself, the specific actual person who had arrived in his life with nothing visible and had turned out to be the most prepared and patient and precisely observant person he had encountered. He asked questions he had never asked anyone. He received honest answers. He gave honest answers to the questions she asked him, which were better questions than anyone had ever asked him, because she had spent 8 months learning where the pretense was, and the honest conversation had given her the map of where to look for what was underneath it. At the end of the year, Marcus said something to Elena that he had not planned to say, and that arrived with the specific quality of things that are true before they are thought. He said, "I think I have spent 31 years being exactly the person you decided to test." She said, "I know." He said, "I failed the test." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is the test still running?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It is always running. That is the point." He said, "Then I would like to keep taking it." She looked at him. She said, "That is the first thing you have said to me that I did not have to extract from underneath something else." He said, "I know." She said, "Good. This story is larger than life because the truth it is carrying needed the room. The truth is this: the people who make decisions about other people's worth based on surface presentation are making decisions about incomplete information." Elena Vasquez had $1.2 trillion and chose to arrive without it because she understood that how a person is treated without the information is the truest available data about who that person is. Marcus Harrington told her, in the moment after the ceremony, exactly who he was when he believed there were no consequences to the telling. The envelope changed the consequences. What it did not change was what he had said, or why he had said it, or what it revealed about 31 years of becoming the person who could say it. What the year that followed changed was whether the person who could say that thing was the only version of the man available. Sometimes the shock of seeing yourself clearly, delivered by someone who is patient enough to let you see it in your own words, is the beginning of something better than the thing it interrupted. Not always, this time possibly. The envelope is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of the honest one, and the honest one is the only one worth telling. He divorced her at their wedding. He told her the truth about what he thought she was. She listened. She placed an envelope on the table. And in the space between the envelope and the moment he finished reading the third page, the entire architecture of his assumptions collapsed in the specific way that architectures collapse when the foundation turns out to have been built on something other than what was thought. $1.2 trillion. She had arrived without a single dollar of it visible. She had done that deliberately. She had done it to find out exactly what she found out. What she did with what she found out was not the revenge of a woman whose power had been underestimated. It was the considered and patient and precise response of a woman who had been trained by a 91-year-old man who had built an empire by making careful assessments and acting on them correctly. She made a careful assessment. She acted on it correctly. The rest is still being written. That is the only honest ending available to a story that is still in progress. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what you would have done with the envelope. Subscribe if you have not already. There is always more to come.